Well, I came back to Ireland after my studies, first and foremost to teach in Ireland in 1958, and at that time there was an Irish Biblical Association, which was a private association. Its secretary, a very good secretary, was Kevin Condon, Vincentian from All Hallows.
Yeah, it was a very interesting small group. We met in Newman House in Dublin, and this Monsignor Patrick Boylan was a member of it, and Martin McNamara, and a prominent member was Professor of New Testament at All Hallows, which then was a Bible seminary, and he really was a moving figure, Kevin Condon.
The president of that was a very well-known Orientalist, Monsignor Patrick Boylan, and the meetings were very nice papers read. He always wanted the papers in advance so that he'd read through them and have very good comments to make on the papers. And that early Irish Biblical Association existed for about 13 years, from 1953 to 1966. And then in due time, after the Vatican Council, the bishops were considering whether there should be Irish theological associations in Ireland, an Irish Biblical Association. So they set up an Irish Theological Association, and then they decided to set up an Irish Biblical Association, and they drew up the IBA, original IBA knew nothing about this. They drew up a constitution of this association, which was to be named the Catholic Biblical Association of Ireland. That's after the model of the American CBA, the Catholic Biblical Association, and they presented that text of their constitution to the IBA to get together to approve it or not to approve it, and the meeting was called for 1966, I think it was in February. Yes, at the first meeting, well, the secretary, Johnny Flynn from Maynooth, sent out a letter to all of those who had a licentiate in sacred scripture and in seminaries, and there were 35 priests present at the first meeting.
It was in Maynooth. I recall it was very well attended, and so the elected as president was Monsignor Patrick Boylan, who had been a professor in Maynooth. Now he was an elderly person at this time, and was then parish priest in Dunleary. And to my complete surprise, I found myself elected as vice president, and it was a 3-year office.
Pa Boylan, since he was the most prominent there, he was elected as the first president. Wilfred Harrington, who would be first president of Pa Boylan, weren't there. He was elected vice president. Then there was and the secretary was Johnny F. Flynn. He was professor of scripture in Maynooth. He did all the work preparing for this and the constitution. He was elected as secretary. And then the treasurer, there was discussion and a vote, and I ended up as secretary, as treasurer. And that was the way for 66 to 69.
And then in due course, I became president, and Demet Ryan, who later became Archbishop of Dublin, he was the vice president, and so on, went on down the line.
Then in 69, we had our first election, and sometime there, some were unhappy with the name Catholic Biblical Association of Ireland, and they wanted it changed to the Irish Biblical Association. It was changed that time to the Irish Biblical Association in 69, and from there we went to 69 to 72. We had our meetings generally. The second meeting was in Maynooth, of course, in 69. And after that, the meetings were outside Maynooth. One was down in a seaside resort in Wexford. The meeting in 72 was down in Lismore in Waterford in the south of Ireland. And the vice president of the association then was Father Dermot Ryan, who was lecturer, I don't think he was yet professor, of Semitic Studies in University College Dublin. he would be the obvious choice, nearly automatically, to be president, but he had just been nominated as Archbishop of Dublin. So they said the two wouldn't go together, so there were discussions then, and I was asked then would I stand for president, and I ended up as president in 72. So those are the first years of the president.
In fact, I would imagine that both Monsignor Boylan and Dermot Ryan, who were founder members of the IBA, one had been my internal examiner and the other had been my external examiner for my BA and my MA in the Department of Near Eastern Languages, as it was the Department of Semitic Languages in those days in UCD. Dermot Ryan was very adamant that anybody who had passed through his department with a degree in Near Eastern Languages would automatically be entitled to become an ordinary member of the IBA. So while I wasn't at the foundational meeting in 1966, very soon after I gained my BA honours in 1966, I would have become a member. The first meeting I was at, I don't remember the actual meeting. I do remember sort of the austerity of the lecture hall in Maynooth and the sort of the tiered benches of the auditorium and the very, I suppose you could say, clerical overall membership that was present there. When I finished my first degrees in UCD, I would have spent 4 years abroad in Switzerland. So when I had come back I spent 1979-80 in Switzerland doing my doctorate. And when I came back then, I think my first I addressed the IBA. I forget what kind of meeting it was, but it was something on, I think the title was, What Did the Scribes Do to the Old Testament, or something like that. So I was elected secretary in 1981 to 81 and 84, and then that was renewed for another set of 3 years, and that was 87, and then in 87 I was elected as president, and I was president from 1987 to 1990.
I wasn't actually in on the very beginning, but I was in the background, if you like, because I was a student of Dermot Ryan's in UCD in the Oriental department, and I was there at the same time as Carmel. Carmel's a year ahead of me, and John Collins, John Mackin, and we would have had great discussions with Dermot Ryan about the origins of the IBA. He would be sorting out all the problems of the Bible and saying that an association would be a great thing to have. So I didn't actually become a member of the association, I think, because I went abroad immediately after studies until about 78, when I came back from Jerusalem, from the École Biblique, and then I became a full member, and I was very involved, I'd say, in the next decade, in the 80s. I think I was on the committee at various stages. I certainly was treasurer at some stage when we had very little money. I remember having to balance the books and not getting on very well at it.
I became president in 72, and Wilfred Harrington, then we were planning, I couldn't give you the executive committee, but I'd say the executive committee included Wilfred Harrington and Professor Andrew Mays of Trinity. 1954, a German scholar who was a specialist in Latin manuscripts had sorted out a group of manuscripts that didn't fit in to the European transmission and had a family characteristics between them, and he believed they were from Ireland. There might be 30 or 40 of them, and he says these are the products of Ireland or Irish related manuscripts from 650 to 800. Said, wouldn't it be good if we did something for our AGM on early Irish exegesis? So we decided to have our AGM on that topic, and we had it in Tala at the Dominican Retreat House. The question arose, wouldn't it be good now if we published these papers? And the question there is, how would we publish them? And then who will publish it for us? So it came out as a book, and the Dominican publications very generously published it at their cost. Thus was born this, what name to give it? Well, I suppose I suggested, maybe since I'd been involved a bit with the Academy, the Royal Irish Academy has a publication, The Proceedings of the Royal Irish Academy, and since the idea of this was to publish the proceedings of our annual general meetings, we called it the Proceedings of the Irish Biblical Association. Thus began PIBA. Yes, the editors, we had an agreement, we'll do every third time. Wilfred Harrington, Andrew Mays and myself, one and the others, we'll take it on ourselves in those days, probably into 1990 or something, to edit the issue.
And towards the end of the 90s, I would have been on the PIBA committee. And I certainly was editor of PIBA from 2001 to 2002. And 2002 was the Jubilee issue, even though, PIBA had been founded in 1974, I think. It didn't come out every year, so 25 years was 2002. And then I was book review editor from 2003, I think, to 2005. So I was pretty involved with PIBA in those kind of years.
It was by having the annual meeting and having the various invited scholars from various parts of the world, it gave us, and it certainly gave me, contact with people for whom whose works I had read, and it was great to hear them speak in person.
My favourite memories would be of the overnight conferences. I can remember ones in particular in Ballinter up in County Meath, and we'd stay until a late hour solving all the problems of the world and of the Bible, I suppose, in particular, over a jar or two. And we had some great speakers at those conferences, down the years. I suppose it was an opening up really to the whole biblical world here in Ireland, and contributing as well, obviously.
But one thing about PIBA, of course, is that you have only to look at the list of publications that are printed at the back of it every time to realise the richness and how the great contributions the Publications Committee have done in all the international scholars that have come of international renown.
As a founder member, I'm gratified to see that the association is still viable and still strong 50 years later, and so I can see it going on into the indefinite future. Why not? And I think that pleases me enormously. I think any of us who are at the very early stage would be very happy to see that 50 years later it's thriving, and we can only wish it well to continue and develop.